Hello, I'm Tamsin Drury and I run Hobe and Word of Warning, and some of you may have seen my videos on DYCP and the last iteration of Project Grants or NLPG. Today isn't a how-to for the uninitiated. ACE do those webinars for newbies, so I'm not going to go through every bit of how you apply to NLPG or what's eligible, etc. This is my personal first analysis of what's new in the latest iteration of NLPG, which started on the 1st of November, and how to approach the new version from a reasonable position of knowledge. NLPG changed on 1st of November 2023, and the biggest differences really are for the under 30 grand. So I'm focusing on the unders, and I'm starting from the assumption that you have a certain level of familiarity with the old system and with Grantium. If you're new to it all, then I suggest booking in for one of Arts Council's webinars. We'll put the link in. Regardless of any changes, the guiding principle remains the same. Do your homework and be really planned. First, the good news. It's better, a lot better. It actually reads like it's been written by someone who might actually have filled one in. The bad news there is that given it's half competent, I'm struggling to make this session funny. It is still very long. The guidance notes alone are 90,000 characters. And in terms of what you write, at 20,400 characters, it's only about 10% shorter than the previous iteration. And there are also a lot of new tick boxes. The best news, though, is that a lot more of those characters are in your control and devoted to talking about the work. Don't be fooled, though. You will still run out of characters very fast. 3,000 characters is still only about 400 words. Also, don't be fooled by them saying you don't have to read Let's Create. While technically you don't, you'd be a bit daft not to have a working knowledge, as it is written all over it, even if not in so many words. Mercifully, they've disguised the outcomes, investment principles, pillars, and elements. They only reappear if you're applying over 30 grand. But the bias towards participation and geographic levelling up remains. It does seem easier now, at least, to make the argument for art, which was sorely missing from the last form. My earlier mantra of think not what Arts Council can do for you, but what you can do for Let's Create does still stand. It's just subtler. You are still tendering for a contract to deliver on Let's Create, but at least there's now space to sell what the project is and fewer hoops to jump through. So taking a closer look, mercifully, this time round, it does feel like you can afford to start at the beginning. Or at least somewhere near the beginning. Personally, I'd do the overview and the keywords last. What I would say, however, is study the whole form and bullet point plan what you're going to put in each question, as there are a lot of questions and they could lead to duplication. After the dates and time-limited priorities, which we will have filled in at eligibility stage, the first question is to give a short, clear overview, 500 characters. Think the length of a bit of brochure copy, 70 to 100 words. This is your sales pitch. Sum it up and make it punchy, descriptive, and memorable. And be warned, it will be made public on their website if you're successful. And again, I'd do this section last. Then there's a new section, keywords or tags. You have up to 100 characters for 5 words or short phrases to sum it up. Reductive might be the word for it. Think search engine optimization. It could be, for instance, dance, site-specific, mental health, innovative, projection mapping. Don't sweat it too much. They say you aren't assessed on it, but I reckon it's how they're going to work out what falls into what categories and what they're funding. Focus. This is the Let's Create outcomes in disguise. It's 3 tick boxes, and you can only choose one. Number 1, my project is about the public taking part. This is effectively the creative people. So it's about participation by non-professional public. This is not for artist development. Artists are still not people. And to reiterate what Arts Council told me, our creative people outcome covers non-professionals and talent development up to the point of embarking on a career. Our creative country outcome covers professionals. So that's focus one, think of creative people. Number two is effectively cultural communities. Making a difference to a geographic location, especially levelling up for culture places. But, and I'm waiting for clarification on this, this may also cover all touring. Number three, my project is about developing professional, creative or cultural practice, is effectively creative and cultural country. This is for creation of professional work for audiences, including artist development. It's tricky if you think you're doing more than one, as you can only select one, and they want you to choose the main focus. But they do say they will correct you if you've picked the wrong one. Next, we come on to give us a more detailed description of your project, what you want to do and why you want to do it. This time, they almost mean detail. You get a whole 3,000 characters. That's maybe 4/5 of a side of A4. This is a chance for you to tell us about your project in your own words. What do you hope will be the result? What's the creative and or cultural idea behind it? Is there a difference you want to make by doing the project? What steps will you take to achieve this? It's interesting, they start talking about you can write in full paragraphs or bullet points and as a guidance, which I guess is a nod to the character limits. At this point, I'm going to hark back to the halcyon days of yore, when there was no form and you just had to submit a written proposal. Very rapidly, ACE realised it wasn't getting what it wanted from freehand proposals, and it soon became clear that their bullet prompts were actually questions you needed to address directly. I would suggest the same applies here. While for character count purposes, you can't use them as headings, I would tend to answer them directly and in order, and make it idiot-proof clear that you are answering them. You maybe could have a short heading, e.g., results, concept, impact, method, just to make it clear that you are answering those 4 bullet points. Next is a new question. What's led you or your organisation to do this project now? What ideas or experiences have led you? Is this project helping you or your organisation learn or try new things? If you've done something similar before, how is this different? This is new. It's a bit like the DYCP why this, why now undercurrent. It may be a kind of fusion of how it's going to develop your practice, or that there's a pressing external or internal motivation. And I would say here to keep the idea relevance in your head in answering this. How is this relevant to wider society or to your organisation or your practice? This is one where there's potential for duplication with the previous questions, so plan carefully. At this point, I want to point out that in the ACE download form, they helpfully suggest how many words they think the character limits might be. Ignore these. They're misleading and will add you to horrible character cutting woes. E.g., they suggest 1,500 characters might be 250 words, whereas the first 250 words of lorem ipsum is 1,688 characters, so way over. Use a character counter like countingcharacters.com. The next question, again, 1,500 characters. How will you know if you've achieved what you set out to do? Are there opportunities for learning and reflecting during the project? How will you know what difference the project has made? What steps will you take to understand what people thought of the project? These are basically the old evaluation questions, or the first and third ambition and quality questions from the last iteration. Note, however, the emphasis on the project making a difference. Once more, this is underlying social relevance, and to a degree, the instrumentalization of the arts. They want you to be making a difference in people's lives. Next, slightly misleadingly, is example. This is your supporting information. Again, same as before, web link or up to 5 pages if it's an attachment, etc. Let's say just the term example seems a bit misleading, but it's pretty much as it was. Next is people and communities. They say we want the projects we fund to reach and engage people and communities in England. This might be during a project or later on. 2 things to note here. The emphasis on engagement and the increasing distinction being made between R&D and production. And then there's also a very finite approach to defining communities and looking at the demographics. And they go on to define that themselves. So the next question is the tick box. Who will get to experience your project? Tick as many as you feel relevant. There are 3 options. Specific communities will experience the project. Me, my organisation, or the team I'm working with, or working on something new, the public will experience it after the project end date. Or me, my organisation, or the team I'm working with, we're working on something that's not public facing, but it will improve our resilience and longer term ability to reach people. This is quite curious for me. This is basically saying the options are for R&D, organisational development, or a specific community, which is number 1. General audiences, or say experience seekers, no longer seem to be an option. The best you might be able to do is cite, for instance, experience seekers in a specific geographic location, e.g. North Manchester. Depending on which box you tick, you then get a secondary question. So for specific communities, you get the whole of 300 characters. Remember, that's really short. 2 tweets, well, less than. Who is the community or communities you plan to reach? And there still seems to be a real emphasis on specifics. If you tick the second point, you then have a further tick box to talk about who you might be seeking to reach in the longer term. And similarly, if the third box, the same set of tick boxes. And when you've dealt with the specific communities, you also get to talk about to hit the types of people tick boxes. You then have another box, which is about how will people experience your project. And here you get to tick boxes, make distinctions between audience members in physical space, in digital space, and visitors. So I'm thinking museums and galleries are visitors, audience members are theatres. They also make the distinction between participants and volunteers, which are always a grey area to define. And then whether it's creative or cultural practitioners, think artists, or collaborators. You then go on to talk about what steps you are taking to make sure your project reaches these people. This is effectively a marketing question. You will either be asked this, or if you've answered the second 2 tick boxes, the question, what steps are you taking to make sure your project benefits people and communities in the longer term? So basically here, this is a very brief 1,500 character marketing plan in either scenario. So you need to be thinking about how to put together a very brief marketing plan for this. The next question is more tick boxes. Where is your project happening? And this gives you a series of options. including digital options. And I'm still not entirely clear about the difference that they cite between streaming and streaming or broadcasting and a digital experience. I'm not sure if something pre-recorded to YouTube counts as streaming and broadcasting or a digital experience. I have asked the question. I'm waiting on an answer for it. We're then into the usual table for locations, switch for digital activity. There's also a drop down for type, plus questions about the name of the digital experience and the audience reach. But other than that, it's the same old locations table. That's the drop downs for digital experience. We're then on to inclusivity and relevance. This is the least disguised. This is the investment principle as it was, just somewhat simplified. Here, they're not asking you the 3 questions there were in the last iteration, but just 3,000 characters on what steps are you taking to make your project inclusive and relevant. So inclusive, how you'll make sure the communities you want to reach are able to access your project and feel included and welcomed. What the barriers to access might be. And then relevance, they count as being how you've involved the people you want to reach in the design and planning of your project, and the data you have on the place or the community your project involves. This is where it gets slightly tricky around purely artistic projects that aren't participatory or involving communities directly. And that's where you might be wanting to draw on your workforce to talk about this. They say, mercifully, it's now just the 1 question, so avoids the duplication of the 3 questions on the old inclusivity and relevance investment principle. So, but you really want to be looking at the demographics of both the target audiences, the participants, and the team, and how relevant that is to the work, obviously, especially with reference to creative case and all the protected characteristics, including socioeconomic. For more place-based work, they're going to want actual geographic demographic data. And again, answer all their prompts. Make sure and maybe give them headings like access barriers, team, and data. Next, we're on to the good old project timeline, no changes. And then we're followed by the management questions, which I think are pretty much the same as the last iteration. You've got who will be working with you to deliver your project. So your team, artists, specialists, partner organizations, etc. And you have 1,500 characters on how they will help you to deliver. I'm imagining that strangely, they still haven't put back the you and your work question. So I'm guessing that you need to include yourself in here. I believe that the role once you're onto the table, adding people, although it says add partner, it means collaborator as well. I believe that when you get onto the table, the role in the project is still pretty much unlimited. So use this both to sell what they're doing for the project, but also the quality of your partners and your collaborators, since you're off character limits to a degree here. They're then on to the questions about industry standards and freelancers and statutory responsibilities, which I believe are the same as the old form. And then we're into the budget, which again seems to be identical. Match funding is the same, 10% of total cost, including the in-kind, and it can be in cash or in kind. But I always say there's a big difference between eligible and successful, and I always aim for 10% cash and 40% in kind, so that you're only asking ACE for half of it. They are less draconian about the match than they were, and there is an option to tick that you don't have 10%, which opens up a series of tick box reasons why not, and 1,000 characters freehand to explain why. The expenditure, again, seems to be pretty much the same as before, as do the budget management questions. If you tick the I've not, this is the first time I've managed a project budget, you then get to questions about what experience you have of managing a project budget of the size, what do you plan to do to manage it, which only appears for 500 characters for the more inexperienced. Then it asks the international costs question, which may or may not be relevant to you, but it's worth noting that they've dropped a lot of strictures on international funding. So it's worth, if you've got a project that goes internationally, it's worth checking the new regulations around that. We're nearly there now. Next is the risk assessment, which is similar to the last iteration, but has now been split into 2 questions: the risks and how you will manage them, and you get 200 characters each. So what are the main risks and challenges to your project in meeting its aims? And what you will do to manage these risks. So very similar, it's a risk assessment. And then there's a safeguarding question that is just a tick box. After that, it's just the monitoring information, which includes the socioeconomic breadwinner when you were 14 question, which, if you haven't encountered it before, is worth looking at. And that's your lot when it comes to the application itself. So those are the changes as far as I can tell. What doesn't change is kind of general guidance in approaching it. Do your homework and line up your ducks, your partners, your outcomes before you even start writing. Even for R&D, you sort of have to have done your R&D. When you do come to start writing, read the whole form through and bullet point what you're going to put in each section to avoid duplication. Though never use an actual bullet point in Grantium because it's about 16 characters. Use a dash. The reason for bullet pointing to start with is it's much easier to pick up and move a bullet point around to make sure you're answering the right thing than it is if you've written longhand to start with. Bear in mind character counts as ever. Although they're better than they have been, they are still tight. And as far as I can tell, I haven't been through every section, but there appears to be absolutely 0 buffer. They seem to be bang on the number they say they are. Never write straight into Grantium. You risk losing the work. Grantium counts characters, including spaces, but its counting is not the same as Word. It also does not tell you how many characters you've used, just that you've used too many when you try to save. Use an online character counter like countingcharacters.com or charactercounteronline.com. So go from Word to a counter and then into Grantium. There is no buffer. Save as you go. When you do get to Grantium, save as you go along. Typing within Grantium does not count as activity, so you may get logged out. And some browsers handle Grantium better than others. I find Safari doesn't work well at all. If used carefully, ChatGPT or Bard or similar can be your friend at this. They can be very good at character cutting and sub-editing, and can also be helpful for making things punchy or a certain style. Some of us might have used them to write the investment principles from scratch, but I probably wouldn't overuse them for this. It's a handle with care, but certainly really useful tools for sub-editing and can save a lot of time in character cutting. I once got it to cut a 3,000 character down to 800 characters, and it did the same job I did, but it took me an hour. It did it in 2 minutes. I, again, would do the preview and keywords last, when you really know what the project is and the points you need to emphasize. The preview is really what needs to stand out, and remember, it will be made public if successful. In general, as ever, keep on making sure you state the bloody obvious. Assume they know nothing. Don't use art form or academic language and get a non-arts person to read it, and don't correct them, rewrite it until they understand it. Hit levelling up for culture places brownie points wherever you can, and look at the socioeconomic profile of any area you are working in. Remember ACE's general aims. You do need to really understand Let's Create, despite what they say. You do need to understand the creative case for diversity and how you're reflecting modern Britain. Do consider where the activity takes place and whether it might reach levelling up for culture places or priority places. If you've had any advice from somebody at ACE, keep in touch with them. Be politic. Let them know if you did or didn't get it. Invite them to a show. Relationship managers don't get told the results even if they assessed. Under 30s don't go through an appraisal. Grant management do risk assessment, then straight to decision meeting. The decision is made by one person with a critical friend from across the whole area, not even region, and is done on a preference system. An over 30, however, does have a basic risk check and then a full in-depth appraisal by a relationship manager, then goes to a panel who only see the appraisal, not the application. Finally, a cautionary tale on money. When they raised the threshold from 15,000 to 30,000, everyone thought, whoopee, which was a bit of a mistake. The budget was not raised. So the same money now has twice the demand on it. To be frank, people got a bit greedy. Everyone went in for 30 grand, and as a result, half the number of applications are being funded. Only 4 or maybe 5 per round in the 28 to 30 grand bracket are successful. In general, leave at least double, if not treble, the amount of time before your project starts. Success rates are so low, the odds are you are going to have to submit 2 or 3 times, and the current turnaround time for an under is 9 weeks. But in general, think very hard about the scale of your project and how much money you really need. Just because you can ask for 30 grand doesn't mean you should. Only ask for what you need. Not only will that benefit others in terms of more projects being successful, but it will increase your chances of getting funded. If you really are hitting the 30 grand mark, it might also be worth thinking carefully whether it might be better to go for a low over 30 grand. Just if you're going to do that, leave enough time for that, as the turnaround on that is now 14 weeks. Good luck with it. I'm going to leave it there. I probably will do some actual Zoom sessions on this, but for now, thank you.